My name is Sarah, from the persons who not heard that yet, and I work for BIS Publishers. We published Anne's book, Brand Strategist, a couple of years ago, where Anne has a lot of frameworks and just a whole book on what thinking like a brand strategist is all about and how you can apply that for social entrepreneurs and people who are change makers. Anne today will be hosting this special live session and unpacking the power of thinking like a brand strategist. At the end of the session, if you are interested in more, we will send a link around for the Brand Strategist community. And also if you're interested in the book, we will provide a discount code, which will be sent to mail after this session. And now I would like to give the words to Anne. And I hope you all get a lot of insight from this webinar, and yeah, you'll find it really useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. So good to see you. Thinking like a brand strategist is one of the more the core ideas to brand a change. And I always like to start off my talks with a little bit of bad news. What we're seeing in the world right now are some really intense, big, hairy, complex issues. So we have, climate change, we have overpopulation, overconsumption, and the good news there is that we also have a lot of people working on solutions. And that's probably the only reason why I can get out of bed in the morning, is that there are so many talented people who are putting their full brains to solving some of these issues. And what we really have noticed in the past few years is like, okay, well, all these people are working on ideas for justice, mobility, food security, education, all amazing ideas and products and services often are launched and they don't manage to grow and find the right type of audiences. And why is that? Is it because the ideas and the products and services aren't good, or is it because they have the right amount of audiences at the right volume? My contention would be that we spend way too much of our time actually as people in the impact space, as well as the people who support people in that space and society at large, thinking about developing really great products and services, but we don't spend nearly as much time in thinking about how do you sell them really well to the world. And that's really a shame, because we're leaving a lot of impact on the table. And I would say that we probably should be investing about half of the time and our resources into selling these products and ideas for change to the world as we are in actually developing them. And that's a pretty controversial topic, because I think people tend to believe that brand and marketing are really like this kind of superficial add-on that you do at the end. But I would actually argue that we need to do this in parallel while we develop these products and services, because thinking about our audiences and thinking about how we put this in, put our ideas out into the world is also going to make the products much better. So I would argue what the world really needs is stronger brands for change. Obviously, I'm a brand developer, and that's, a car salesman will recommend, obviously, that you buy a car. So I'd like to just take you on just a short journey of where I came from and how I came to these conclusions. So my name's Anne Miltenburg, originally from the Netherlands, but I've lived a big chunk of my adult life abroad. I grew up a pretty idealistic kid, became a vegetarian at age 8, wrote school papers about apartheid, and decided to become a designer, and really thought that I was able to channel some of that social engagement into my work. And I actually ended up graduating on visual literacy for a project on HIV/AIDS communication in Mali, in Africa. That the development aid space left me a little disillusioned. And when I was offered a job at a brand agency, when I came back, I was really excited, because the commercial space felt very clear. There were no smoke and mirrors, there were no complex moral dilemmas, and I was really excited. So for the next 12 years, I was I worked with a lot of joy on the brands of like really commercial organizations as well as charities like the Red Cross or cultural organizations. Some of my former colleagues are in this audience, which is really, really cool. And one of the things I loved about working in the world of brands was that you got to take a look on the inside of all these different organizations and how they were building their products and how they were bringing them out into the world. And that was incredibly satisfying if you're a super curious person. And the thing that was missing was really this type of social engagement that was really important in my personal life. And I tried to channel that through, for instance, my work as a teacher at the Design Academy, where we had students work on ideas like reinventing the bank or designing a revolution. But I didn't want that to just like, I didn't want the ideological side of my work to just be limited to a student experimental stage. Like I wanted to really bring it to life. And one of the things that started to annoy me time and time again was this idea that my certain commercial clients that we had were able to get millions of people to run for their products and services where I felt like they didn't necessarily add so much to the world. And I felt like that playbook of how you're able to do that, that should be something that is accessible to many more people in the world. Because at the core of it, like if you're thinking about how can we get these ideas and products and services to grow, you need people to buy into them. And getting people to buy into stuff is exactly what people in the brand world do day in, day out. So I kind of put my professional skills and my personal passion and what I felt like the world needs, I put that together. And at the intersection of that was branding for social change. Now, it would have been quite simple to say like, okay, well, just go and work for social entrepreneurs, for instance, and just focus on that. But I felt like there was a bigger challenge to be tackled there. And I gave myself an assignment. So I gave myself a creative question. So in this case, how can I help create a world where a family starting a fair trade lemonade brand can rival a brand like Coca-Cola? And I thought it was a really interesting question to start out with because I really wanted to discover what is holding people back from building stronger brands. And generally, the assumption is that that's budget. So it has to do with money. Like you just don't have the money to invest like those big companies do. But as I traveled around the world and spoke to hundreds of people, I figured that it's not so much the money, it's the mindset that is missing. So I packed up my stuff, sold half of it, put the other half in storage, and started on this journey that became the Brandling. So the Brandling is the education company that I started to train social entrepreneurs, disruptors, activists to think more like brand strategists. And Brand the Change the Book is one of the products of that organization. So there's a community, there's events, there is training programs, and it's really grown in ways that I could have never imagined about 7 years ago when I started on that journey. So we've trained about 2,500 people. There's about 10,000 people around the world who are using our tools, and we now have 38 certified trainers across 4 continents, some of whom are also on this call, so represent. And at the core of everything that we do is this belief that there are 8 useful ways, about 8, I mean, there could be 9, there could be 7, you be the judge of it. There are about 8 useful ways in which we think brand strategists think and act that are really extremely helpful for anyone trying to make a difference in the world. So I'm going to take you through those 8, and I'd also love to hear what you think. So feel free to chime in. When you wake up in the morning, you want to make a difference in the world. What are the things that are actually going to help you to get there? So a really clear idea of like, what's your vision for the world? How do you think the world, what do you think the world can look like? What's your plan of how we can get there? How are you going to get people on board and follow you and basically understand what you do, get other people involved so you really can create a movement? So that codification of that process is really what thinking like a brand strategist is all about. And the first like super key thing I think that brand strategists are just kind of born and trained to do is that we try to make complex things easy to understand. I hear about, well, let's say hundreds of pitches each year from people who are trying to build new services, products in the energy space, in the justice space, food products. And what I've noticed is that some of these problems that we're trying to solve are so complex that our language around them also is very complex. And so the process of making complex things easy to understand really is something that I think needs to come first when we're thinking about the creation of brands. So I sit in meetings where I get sentences thrown at my head, like the ones you're seeing on the screen right now. Sustainability crucibles for cradle-to-cradle concepts, enabling environmental activists to empower communities, etc. So there's a lot of language and jargon that is very difficult for people who are not familiar with these type of spaces to understand and pick up, but also people who are in the space sometimes to understand. And it's a sad moment when we can't create the impact that we want to see because language is standing in our way. One of the examples in the book that I always love and kind of come back to time and time again is the case of Dr. Ayanna Johnson. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard of her, but she's an amazing rising star. She's a marine biologist. And one of her key moments in her career was when she was advising a Caribbean island government on policies for ocean conservation. And the thing that was working against her was the fact that everyone believes that conservationists are basically out to destroy jobs and hug animals and keep you from doing the things that you want to do with natural resources. So she invested a year speaking to different stakeholders around the island. So these were fishermen and government officials, citizens, about what what their thoughts about the ocean were, what their experiences were, how they were generating income from it, how they were generating enjoyment from it. And based on that year of conversations, came up with the idea or the phrase, using the ocean without using it up. And that phrase was the phrase that really helped her to get this really important ocean policy to be accepted by the government and by the different lobbies around the government who wanted to keep economic interest in place. And that kind of thinking, like the investment to take something extremely complex and boil it down to something that's easy to understand, is the kind of thinking that we really, really love to see more of in the world. Number two, I think as brand strategists, we have this mindset and attitude that you want to meet people where they already are. So we're not fighting reality. And I think this makes us very different, for instance, from activists. So I think what's amazing about activists is that they really set this new standard for like, this is what our behavior should be, or this is what our attitude should be about a certain topic. And they're going to try and move a lot of people or move the culture there. But when you think like a brand strategist, it's more about thinking where people already are, what their needs are, what their world is, what their vocabulary is, and meeting them in that space. So just to give you one example, we see, especially here in East Africa, we see a lot of initiatives around family planning and reproductive rights. Now, those are really important aspects to increasing people's well-being and keeping the planet livable. The only issue is that no one wakes up in the morning thinking about family planning or reproductive rights. So some of the organizations that we've been able to look at over the past few years have been actually quite successful, amazingly successful, have not attacked the issue of family planning and reproductive rights through that type of lens, but found a way to actually talk about sex and pleasure. What does everyone in the world want to know more about? Well, sex and pleasure, time and time again, end up at the top of the list. And so for a brand in the family planning and reproductive rights space to actually say, we're going to position ourselves as the authority or the information source on sex and pleasure, is an incredibly powerful brand strategy in order to get millions of people interested in the topics of family planning, reproductive rights. And this example comes from an organization called Love Matters, which is active here as well as in India. If you're interested in that topic, be sure to check them out. Number 3, the mindset of thinking like a brand strategist is really at the core about broadening the tent. So just kind of to get back to that point of like me as an 8-year-old becoming a vegetarian. So this was the 80s in the Netherlands, and in the supermarket, within the, the shelves of meat products, there was like the really sad, like one little thing of like soy sausage and a big sticker that said meat replacement. And it tasted terrible, like our dog wouldn't even eat it. And it was very clear within our family, where I was the only vegetarian, that this was the product that was meant for me. And what we're seeing now is this much broader shift across Western society, at least, of people adopting plant-based meals. And that is a really interesting analogy, because I think what we're learning as we're evolving on that topic is that you're not going to be successful selling a vegetarian or a vegan lifestyle to meat eaters if you're only going to talk about animal rights or sustainability, but you can get them on board when you talk about taste. So the arguments here that we use are going to be really influential in the amount of people that we can invite into the tent, so to speak. So if you want to create change and you're only going to preach to the people already in your tent, your impact is going to be rather small. But if there's a way to broaden that tent, to get lots of people involved, merely by thinking of the needs of that audience and what are their mindsets, then I think we could really accelerate some of the ideas that I hear people pitch every day. The 4th thing I think brand strategists are really good at is actively directing how other people think and feel about you. So this is really grounded, I think, in how the human brain works. So when you, for instance, have to consider getting a new bank account, you dig into your brain, to the archive of your brain, and you go into all the different associations you have about banks, and you'll pick up like all the different ways that you've heard or seen that brand mentioned, all the different interactions that you have with them. And that process of ensuring that all the different hints that people have picked up on you on the outside are actually going to redirect them and help them to create a coherent idea of who you are and what you do and why that matters and how that relates to their world. That kind of active direction is super important in people's ability and willingness to say like, okay, yeah, I choose them. And if we want more people to say yes to the ideas that we're proposing, we need more people to direct actively what the reputations of these products and services are. And common kind of knowledge within the brand world is that if you're not actively directing this yourself, then other people will do it for you. So nonetheless, you'll have a reputation, and it's better to be the one who's sitting in the driver's seat there. The 5th notion is this understanding that you always compete with someone for something. And I feel like within the impact space, what we often do is we're not thinking so much about competing, because the emphasis is really on collaboration. And that in itself is, of course, like a fantastic thing. But what we forget when we think only about collaboration is that we still always compete with someone for something, like time, talent for our teams, funding, grants. So people in general only have so much time or money to spend, and you want them to spend it with you. So I'll just give you an example that I think is quite telling. So I remember working with an organization, a museum on the topic of human rights, and I asked someone in the leadership, who is your competition? And she said, well, we have no competition because there's no other human rights museum in town. And that kind of gave me pause because my professional deformation lies in an entirely different way. So her response is actually quite typical and very normal, because we tend to think about competition as like, what are all the other things that are on our shelf in the supermarket, so to speak. So it's very sector driven. But if you think like a brand strategist, you're thinking like, okay, well, who is the most obvious, like the best placed customer for this service? What is a problem that they have in their life? Well, for instance, let's say for this museum, we think that families with children between, let's say, 8 and 16, who are looking for something kind of somewhat fun and educational to do on a Sunday afternoon, we think that that's our best audience. And who we compete with is other things in that space. So that could be a cinema, it could be a swimming pool, a natural history museum. It has nothing necessarily to do with that sector specific item. And once you understand who you, sorry? And once you understand who you compete with, it's much easier to understand how you can actually position yourself in order to draw more people in. Number 6, the ability to focus resources. The mindset of a brand strategist is very much focused on how much time and talent and money do we have to spend, and how can I use them in the very best possible way. So when you get a briefing and you are told that this is a product that's for everyone, you kind of immediately get suspicious. And the parallel that I usually draw is one with fishing. So imagine that you're fishing from all of the world's oceans. It seems like an amazing opportunity because it's an incredibly big space. The problem is that you don't know where the fish are. So your ability to say like, okay, well, I'm going to actually focus my resources and I'm going to go for this small pond. But in the process of this pond, it's actually easier for me to catch the fish because I can actually see where they are. I can see if kind of the bait that I use and the hook that I use and the way that I swing my my rod, if those things are working to catch this first group, now I have a baseline starting point to actually now say like, okay, let's expand to a slightly bigger pond and see if this also works there. So this ability to work on like a limited budget and to focus in on a certain group is really important for the success and for your ability as an organization to learn. Which brings me to point 7. So having a plan. I'm struck by how often we are in situations where people don't have a plan. So they have a fantastic product or service. They know they're going to launch it. And then when my question of like, oh, what's your brand strategy? Then understandably, it's quiet on the other side, because that's a difficult question to answer. And there's a lot of people who have a good answer. But more often than not, it stays silent for quite some time. And what the answer usually comes back as is, we're going to launch this. It's going to be great. People are going to like it and they're going to tell others about it. And that's how it's going to spread. And this is what I always call it, like the fingers crossed brand strategy. And I think that's really very understandable because, like, as I mentioned before, like we're really tuned to like wanting to create something that's great. And we're kind of told throughout our lives, like, well, if, good things sell themselves. And if it's so great, it'll, you don't even have to make an effort. But that's a really kind of incredibly destructive thought process and assumption to hold. And I hope that we can really get rid of this idea that if you build it, they will come. If you build it, they won't come. Like maybe for 1% or 1% of 1% that actually happens. But for most of us, it just takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in order to get people to buy into what we do. So the ability to have a plan and to execute on it is crucial. I always use this cartoon of 2 mathematicians who stand at the blackboard with a beautiful formula. with, one half of the formula and the answer, and in the middle, a miracle occurs. So we definitely believe that, yes, we need to be more explicit in step number 2. And last but not least, number 8, when you think like a brand strategist, you know that you always need a call to action. So you need people to be able to literally know what to do. So what is the behavior change that you want from me? What is the thing that I need to buy or invest in, or the message that I need to spread to other people? And this is something that is difficult in social change areas where the product is very complicated, or the communication hasn't been thought out in such a way that I'm actually able to access it through online services. But the ability to just literally say, this is what I want you to do, is going to have a huge impact in your ability to convert people to your cause. So those are the kind of 8 principles that we believe are really key. And then the next question would be, well, can you teach anyone to think like a brand strategist? And that's a question that I've spent the last 6 years trying to test and prove out. So I believe that as people, we kind of use our brand thinking brains hundreds of times each day, because it's really a way of making choices. So we think about which milk or non-milk we buy. We think about whose cooking advice do we take for our Christmas dinner when, the whole family is going to come and we're going to be scrutinized for our cooking. We're going to think hard about which cancer charity we might support when we have a couple of €100 left at the end of the year. We're going to think about who do we trust when we have to, for instance, make a legal document like a will. Is that going to be the old school office around the corner? Is that going to be the new upstart online service farewell? So in a way, I really believe that we are all brand thinkers, and that's something that we can activate in people. But at the same time, when it comes to building our own brands, that knowledge really only gets us so far. So yes, we believe that thinking like a brand strategist can be taught. And so what do we teach? So one of the main things that I discovered when I was on the road and talking to hundreds of people around the world was that the process of brand development was extremely opaque. So this idea of knowledge about branding was really disclosed in really abstract ways. So there were brand gurus writing beautiful books and very inspirational books, but at the end of it, it was still okay, but where do I start now for myself? So one of the first things that I did when I started the branding was say, okay, well, what we need is a really good, simple method to say, what are the different elements of phases of the brand development process? So we've defined sensing. So the first phase where we do the research and we get the information, inspiration, and insights that we need to develop a brand. Then we go into this brand thinking phase where we really, this is the ideation phase where we think about creative ideas about how we want to define our brand and really bring it to life. Then we switch to brand making, where we're turning those insights and ideas into real life expressions, developing a face, a voice, and thinking about the experiences and that the brand will direct and bring those to life. And last but not least, the kind of ongoing process of brand building, because this is not a linear process. This is something that you start and execute over time. And all the 8 type of mindset moments that I discussed previously, they're kind of worked into this process. And one of the things that became really clear in the early days of the branding was that people were missing this really clear framework for okay, but what is a brand? And this idea that you can direct how other people think and feel about you, that's very let's say abstract and feels hard to make tangible. So we tend to compare it to humans. We are humans. We think about things in human scale. And so what we see is that this idea that brand is really this works in the same anatomy as humans do. So we have a brand core. So there's something on the inside of us, our character, our beliefs, our personality. And that translates in a certain way, a way that's unique to everyone. That Eric will do different than Ingeborg, will do different than Alexander. Like, what's your visual and your verbal expression? And those two are interconnected. And now when we think about all the ways that you and your audience meet, so all the different interaction points, those are again the results of all those beliefs on the inside. And this model proved to be helpful for people because they could see, like, what's the connection between the inside and the outside, and how does the outside actually relate back to that core. So in 2014, we created this model that really puts all of those layers together and helps people to understand, like, hey, how do I define the framework underneath my brand? So what is the purpose that we're pursuing with this idea or product or service? What's the world that we want to see? How are we going to get there? What are the values that are going to drive our decision making? And what are we actually specifically committing to deliver to people? And then think about, like, okay, well, how does that translate to a visual, a verbal identity? So all the different cues that you can give people on the outside in terms of visuals, like logos and colors and fonts, but also verbal identity, like your tone of voice, your messaging, all those different elements of identity that are really crucial and that we're just trained as humans to interpret without needing much explanation. And then the last layer is, how do all of those things actually translate to experiences that you offer? So the first thing on the outside is obviously, like, how do people experience the product and service? What is it that is going to bring your purpose out into the world? But also, what are the places and events that you need to be seeing? What actually are you going to do in terms of communication? Which channels are you going to use, and how are you going to use them? What are the partnerships and collaborations that are going to help you put yourself on the map and really, again, put that purpose at the forefront? What are the people, the talent, and the behavior that you want to put in the spotlight to bring that to life? And what kind of technology could aid you in that process? And this, so the brand thinking canvas became kind of like the core tool of the methodology that we teach in our courses, and has become really interesting and impactful, applied to, like, a lot of different ways. So yes, in the traditional way, like, it's helping businesses, commercial businesses, impact-driven businesses, but also NGOs, and a wide range of other applications. So for instance, we work with youth in Kenya who have ideas for change within their communities and who need to get other people on board in order to bring those initiatives to life. So they are thinking about their personal brands as community leaders in actually getting that change to happen. We worked with women in Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure how up to date you are on Saudi Arabian politics, but a couple of years ago, women were allowed to work there for the first time legally. And women were already quite educated, were ready to join the workforce, but had never had to think about, hey, how do I position myself? Like, how do I come across? What are my strengths? What are my beliefs? What am I committing to deliver to, like, my future employers? So we worked with an organization that is training hundreds of women to get ready for this new workforce. And we created a special kit for them to help women create their personal brands, which was quite an amazing experience. And another really interesting, different type of application of thinking like a brand strategist was for the Dutch Ministry of Defense. So I was approached by a general who said, you know, we're at the Ministry of Defense, we're really thinking more and more about how we actually need to advance peace in the world. But we're finding that kind of, there's an innovative mindset that's really lacking, and how can we push that conversation in a way that we can talk much more holistically about it. So we created a workshop for them around reframing the Ministry of Defense as the Ministry of Peace. And what would that actually mean for everything from, like, the products and services that they put out in the world, the type of people they hire, the type of products that they develop, the technology that they need, the partnerships that they make. You can imagine that the Ministry of Peace has very different partners from the Ministry of Defense. And that was a really interesting workshop for me to run and to see how people who have no real exposure, let's say, to the brand and marketing side, but who are incredibly embedded within like their expertise, how they can actually use this method to think about pushing their organizations in a new direction. So I'd love to take you through a similar exercise, but I thought I would pause for a second to see if anyone has questions or comments or thoughts that they'd love to share. You're welcome to turn your microphone on. It's a bit, see, I like to think of this more as a village square than a Zoom call.
Brand strategist myself, I recognize most of those 8 points. What I'm wondering a lot of the time, what we focus on with brand is that it needs to be unique. I have had a client who said he didn't want to be unique, but he was unique in that sense. Does that fit into your 8 points somewhere, or would it be worthy of being a 9th point of thinking like a brand strategist?
Well, I suppose, I think I could relate to it if you're saying like, well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So we don't necessarily need to be unique. Like if I'm meeting all of my organizational goals within being similar to a lot of other options, then I kind of understand that it's a little bit, it can be fun to be contrarian and say like, I don't need to be different from anyone else. So if that's his experience, I guess he probably has a good reason to say so. It's probably working for him.
Yeah, but I still think that they are, even though, let's say it's a law firm, and you go to them like for any law firm for solid advice and, other things because they're knowledgeable in this section, there still would be a reason to choose. So, it came to mind when you showed like cancer research and Macmillan, and, they have a different personality, a different brand. So, and I would say every person is also unique, but some people stand out more than others. So there's a scale. But I'll always think when I'm working with a new client, like what makes this client different from their competitors? And I wonder if that differentiation is something that is part of one of your 8 points, like, directing how others think and feel about you, or if it's substantial enough to stand on its own.
Yeah, so I would say it's kind of part of this idea that you always compete with someone for something. But I would be totally happy to make it point number 9. So you need to stand out from the crowd. One of the challenges I feel in working with people who feel like they actually don't is that you, as a brand strategist, and often are engaged to kind of provide an external cosmetic layer to make them look different. And this was something that I felt that's definitely not where my talent lies. I know people who are amazing in the space who can do that, but that was something, for instance, when I was working at Interbrand, one of my clients was a drugstore, and it was very difficult for me to get into the mindset where like, okay, well, you're selling pads and lipstick at the same price as the next person, and now you're hiring someone to give people a compelling reason to do that. And that was just like, some people are really, really good at that in the brand business, but I just was not that person. So in that sense, I was a really crappy creative director. But that was also just, I think, really the difference also in what type of organization you work with, and if they're willing to be innovative, or if they're willing to actually change the product and service also based on insights of like, what are consumer trends, what are new insights. So I think that's an entirely different process that usually happens before you end up at the desk of the brand consultant. So yes, agreed, point number 9.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Cool. Is there anyone who's currently building a brand for change who's like, we already have these mindsets, but despite having them, we're not getting anywhere?
Or I can maybe share something.
Hi, Yella.
Hi, my name is Jelle. We build patient monitoring systems for African hospitals, and it's called goalfree.org if you want to visit our website.
I do.
Remember. And the reason I am here at this call, as well as I really liked your presentation, by the way. Thanks for it. And something we struggle with is that we are basically a medical technology company, which always has something kind of the feeling of doing good, but also the feeling of very expensive, big investments, big exits. So it has both a negative and positive image. And what we are basically creating is like a social enterprise medical technology company that focuses on places where medical technology is needed the most. So, for example, African hospitals. And we struggle a bit also with this positioning, like if we, for example, participate in a competition with other medtech companies, serious investors call us like, oh, those guys, they're doing something for not really profitable market, so they're not interesting. And it's hard for us to kind of position ourselves well in these as a social enterprise, but also as a serious technology company, basically.
Well, lucky me, because I worked on exactly this type of project last year, so I've got some thoughts. So I think what's interesting about the kind of brand that you're building is that you are trying to build it for two very different audiences. So you have, on one hand, you have the people who are purchasing medical technology in hospitals in, let's say, low resource settings. So that could be African countries, or could be, low budget hospitals elsewhere in the world. And then you have investors on the other side. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think is quite interesting there is that both of them probably are not so interested in the bigger social impact story, but they are interested in actually the quality of the product and the size of the market. So if you can prove to investors like, hey, we're a serious medical technology company and we develop technology that is affordable to this really growing sector of healthcare within low resource settings, and to prove what the size of the market is there, because you're able to show them like, hey, we're getting uptick with all these different hospitals. So one of the things that I can definitely recommend is to market the product really well on value that is of interest to the people who are purchasing the technology locally. And they are not going to be interested in things like social impact. They're going to be interested in what is the price of the technology, what is the its effectivity in locations like ours, because they will have intermittent energy, they'll have a huge overburdened staff. So how do these products actually work for us? So it's probably not an issue of money so much as it is an issue of like, am I going to actually get stuff that works for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's basically exactly what we do in the sense that we build products that are really suited for these types of hospitals. So we also try to brand them as being the most robust, being the most easy to use, user friendly, and also affordable. Those types of things.
Yeah. So I can share a link with what we worked on last, or maybe Wanjiru, do you want to share a link to Equalize Health?
I know them.
Yeah, so we did, Wanjiru and I were involved in their rebrand process last year, and so cool. That's where we picked up a lot of different ideas in the space.
This is actually because I know DREF from the time it was called DREF, and this is exactly kind of the I really love how it's made equalized health and the types of visuals they now use and empowered people and colorful, and I think that is done really well. So that's something I'm also kind of searching for, to have the balance of some sort of empowered company with a lot of people that really want to solve problems instead of being like an NGO talking about the majority of deaths that happen in children.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this organization is in a way, they have a disadvantage over you, which is that they are still a not-for-profit, so they also communicate to donors. So that does necessitate some level of like needing to speak about the social impact more. But if you don't have that and you can really focus on what do the investors want and what do the doctors want, I think you could build an even more powerful brand.
Yes, so we are 1.5 years underway. So that's also the challenge, and I guess they went through this, is that we are still trying to find out if we can ever make an investable story out of it. Since an investable story means you have to build an exit for your company, and building an exit means you have to sell your company, for example, or go to stock. Go to an IPO, and if we cannot make a really good investable story, then we will probably end up similar to Equalize Health, having to raise all this money each year to fund their operations.
Mm.
So that's also underlying kind of the brand question, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe this goes a little too deep for the general group, but
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting story because, you know, obviously I'm not a super expert, but I guess being based in Kenya in the past 6 years, like there's a huge, obviously a rising middle class and a bigger demand for, you know, quality medical equipment. And I think the key really will be like who's going to be able to actually develop something and distribute it effectively to the market. So I've seen people develop a good pitch around that, but of course I wouldn't be at liberty to disclose it because it's confidential information, but I think there's interesting information out there about the market growth and all of that. Thanks for the question, Jelle. That was a good one.
Yeah.
Lucky me.
Thanks.
Patricia, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, Anne, for an incredible talk about some important points and notions for companies. You know, well, for brands anyhow. I was wondering, one of the things that I'm struggling the most right now is for entrepreneurs to select the values. I don't know if that has happened to you, but I mean, when we come to that, like, what are your values? They're always struggling, not only about selecting them, but also expressing them. What do they want to, how do they distinguish themselves from the others? So I don't know if you have some suggestions, because sometimes I feel, and we have discussed this inside the community, that you are not, you're a brand specialist, not a brand, a business consultant, or in this case, you're not a psychologist, because sometimes values go deeper to personal development or getting to know you deep. So, I mean, do you believe that they have to do the exercise that, like the manifesto, or are there any exercises that you have come across when it comes to selecting the values for a brand?
Well, we have the values game in the book, which is one that you can play when you have, you know, let's say more than 2 people. So that's really about challenging each other. Start with your long list and then debate your way through like why each value is important. But I think the key to that process is really also challenging people. Like, okay, well, when was the last time that you made a decision that actually cost you something because there was a principle at stake? So I think it's very easy to think about values in terms of like, oh yes, we're transparent, we're honest, we're authentic. But like, okay, well, let's see how transparent you're really willing to be. So for instance, are you willing to show to the last degree what's going to do with people's personal data? Or how transparent are you willing to be about the impact that you've achieved? And those really give you a sign of or a better idea of which values are actually really at the core of an organization, or which are kind of more like, you know, things that we would like to be or say to be, but actually aren't. And I do think it's often the case that it's a blend of, you know, personal and organizational values. So obviously people came together to create something based on a set of values that they hold dear. And from anthropological research, we also know that values are the things that change the least over time. So your product might change or your surface might change, but your values are what stick the longest. And so it's definitely worth digging into that terrain and that decision making a little bit more. I think it's not just with values. I think it's also with mission. So what we're currently also kind of discussing in the community is like this idea of like, you know, purpose and vision driven organizations. Are they you know, it's something of a fashion that everyone's jumping on, but are you actually able to walk the talk when it comes to that purpose? So are you really translating it to every different aspect of the organization? So you know, for instance, an example that I gave was, you know, from I think Marike shared an interesting article about Dutch banks and how they are not living their purpose. For instance, if you're saying like, you know, our mission is to finance the aspirations of small local businesses, but your HR policy still actually will reward the salespeople who just are selling the biggest loans, then you're not really able to bring that purpose to life. So being able to articulate well the things that are at the core of the model, and then also actually living up to them, I think is really crucial if you want these brands to be believable. If that answers your question, Patricia.
Yes, thank you so much. I think with the decision making, or maybe translated in a vivid example, how did you live that value in the last couple of days, or something that could also help to select them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a little bit of a cheat sheet also in the book that you can take a look at. So I'm going to take one more question from Vikrant, and in the meantime, my colleague Wanjiru is going to share a link to a Miro board. Not sure if all of you have ever worked with Miro before, but we use it in all of our online programs, and I find it really a great way to collaborate together, because what we wanted to do is see with all of you, like what's your vision, personal or professional vision for change? How are you going to get there? And if we're going to do a little vision mission exercise. So Wanjiru just shared the Miro board, and while you should be able to just simply get on there, but if not, we have some time here in the chat. We can troubleshoot with Wanjiru while we listen to Vikrant.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this workshop. I'm loving it thus far. One thing that really stood out to me was, you know, when you said that end customer who buys your product or service is not necessarily interested in the social impact of your product, but in meeting their needs, you know, at the right price. So, yeah, and I'm just left with this question: does you know that message of, hey, we have the social impact, not help the brand image at all? Because for me as a consumer, it does. When I see a brand which is a fair trade one instead of, you know, something else, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to support that. Or when I see something that is, you know, ethical, even if it's more expensive, it does. So that's why for, you know, my work, I try to brand our organization as, you know, let people know that, hey, this is our impact as well. Does that help? Or
Yeah, super recognizable question. I think it 100% depends on the service and the audience. So, for instance, there is a company called The Good Roll. They sell toilet paper, that then funds hygiene products in low-income countries. It's pretty expensive toilet paper. I mean, you really, really gotta love that mission to choose that one over the normal toilet. Like it's like I think seven times as expensive as a normal roll. So I 100% agree with you. Like there are people who are interested in funding that. But there's also, so that's a way to kind of stand out and to create great impact. But there's also lots of products that might have a tremendous social impact, but by selling it that way is actually going to rub people entirely the wrong way. So for instance, I think the example of the vegan hamburger is a really good one. If I talk about animal cruelty to people, which could be like my number one reason to develop a vegan burger, I'm not going to get as many people to be interested in that as I am going to be in selling it on taste. Another example here in Kenya, we have a product, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, it's called M-Pesa. It's basically a bank account through your phone number. Now that is a concept with an incredible social impact. I mean, it's been able to help people to send money hundreds of kilometers away to family members back at home, to do business more easily, a lot more safety as a result. But if you're going to market this to consumers as like a great way to lift you out of poverty, they're really going to be either super confused or a little pissed off. So I think it depends on the product and the audience, and you have to let that kind of lead the way in how you present something to the world.
Perfect. Thank you. One quick clarification about something else you said. You said that you're building a brand for two audiences. One is the end consumer who's buying the product, and one is the investors. And that was for me like wow. So is that, did I hear that right? Two different audiences. You see it in that way?
Yeah. So if you use the brand thinking canvas, so the second part of that is about the audience. So can you in some cases, what you do when you have all these different stakeholders, that could be investors, that could be team members, customers, etc. So a lot of brands have these different audiences, but they usually focus like specifically on like the audience that is the most important. So that's usually where the money is coming from. Investors don't need to be reached through a brand. You have all kinds of direct links to speaking to investors, but they are going to look at a brand, whether it's appealing and what its value is to customers, right? Mm-hmm. But for a lot of impact organizations, they actually have a lot of different audiences, and it's not so clear who should be the primary audience. So you have donors, you have beneficiaries, you have partners, and you actually need to communicate to all of them. So there it really becomes this game of understanding, okay, well, how do we present what we're trying to do to each of those in a way that appeals to them? And that's a very specific art, I think, that is quite a thing to learn to master.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Great. So if all went well, and you were able to join Miro, then what you're seeing right now is something like this. A Miro board with lots of flying labels. I'm just going to bring all of you to me. I love to see everyone on screen. So two parts of the brand thinking canvas that we think are really key to people who are trying to create changes. Like, people need to understand like what is the world that you're trying to create and how you're going to get there in order for me to follow. So I've just with a little star, I've just highlighted two elements of that brand core, and thought it would be fun to do an exercise together. In general, vision and mission are really a little bit they're always confusing, so they're hard to keep apart. They are a little abstract. So the way that we always use this in our classes is we say the vision is the world that you want to see, and the mission is how you're going to get there. The model, is it sitting right here? It is not, yep. So I've just taken a couple of examples from the book that we use to help people understand, like, oh, okay, what would this mean for me? So we have an example of Waka Waka, of Nest, of SpaceX, of Solar City. I have my personal kind of vision and mission story on there, and it would be amazing to just kind of learn about what all of you guys potentially are looking to change in the world and how you're going to get there, and help each other reflect on that. So if you're up for it, we can do this exercise together. I wanted to create little breakout rooms to put you together with 2 other people, so in groups of 3, to help each other reflect on what your vision and mission could be. For some of you, will be super lucky because you'll get one of our certified trainers in your group, who are the people who have worked with this method for hundreds of hours. So they'll be able to support you in that. If you have any questions, of course, also feel free to share them in the chat. You should be able to still chat with us even from the separate rooms. We're going to do this exercise for about 15 minutes and then I'll come back together. And as you guys are discussing, I'm going to be able to see on the board what you're working on. So it's going to be quite exciting. Obviously, a lot of these exercises and the kind of tools that I walk through are from the book Brand the Change. BIS will share a link with you. If you don't have it yet, you can get the book with them through with a discount. So Sarah will share that on Friday together with a link to the recording. If you want to replay it or send it to someone else, you're very welcome to. Yeah, so some of the things that we have going on at the moment. So we have Brand the Change Academy, which is a program where I help a group of maximum 16 people in an 8-week live online course to build their own brands. We have the Brand Thinking Canvas facilitation course. So some of the people that I see here are already on that. So that's where we help other brand professionals who want to work with our tools. Like we're basically opening up all our experience and using that. And we also have really cool local meetups who are currently online, like the Lisbon meetup, for instance. So that's a group of young people in Portugal who are supporting local brands to strengthen their presence and grow their audience. And that's a really fun one to join if you can. There's also a group led by Hanneke, Bas, and David that is focused completely on personal branding. So one of the things that we've seen in the past year, especially because COVID has really sharpened up some certain aspects of work life, which includes like online visibility and huge increase of competition for similar roles. So people felt it was in the community felt like increasingly this topic of personal branding is just something we can't avoid, and how do we do it, and how do we do it well in a way that we're all comfortable with. So those are monthly groups where people get together and support each other and hold each other accountable to actually getting the work done. So that's really fun. So super happy to see you at any of these, and to see this as really the start of a conversation rather than a one-time event.